This is a Sirocco knuckle joint. Now it's probably got difference to do in the year. The Sirocco I have is 79, and the knuckle joint is much lighter. But if you actually measure from the center here out to the surface here, the in surface, they're both the very same. It's just on the Golf one here, it's much beefed up around here. But anyway, after putting power steering in the car, of course, you're putting an awful lot less stress on any of these components because the rack itself is taking most of the brunt of the work. So what I've done is I've cut the remaining portion of the bar. There would be a second joint out here, the same as this. So I've cut that off. I'll show a photograph there of the dimension I used, but the dimension I use is for the Sirocco. And curiously as well, the Sirocco one needs to be longer than the Golf one. Now I don't know why that is. I was always on the belief that they were the same floor pans. The steering column on the Sirocco does seem to be at a shallower angle, mind you. Sitting in the car, the steering wheel is much more looking at you in the face, if you understand me, as opposed to the Golf. It's kind of tipped up slightly. So there may be some difference in the chassis of the car there. Not too sure about that, but anyway, basically on the Sirocco one, you'll see on the photograph, it's like 110 mil from this edge to the edge of the Toyota knuckle. This guy here is much less on my car, so anyone that wants to do this kind of a mod, I would say, is get to the point the rack is in the car, the column is back in, is on the framework back in, and then measure the distance between putting both knuckles. You won't be able to fit this one across because you'll have a big chunk of it down here still, but you'll be able to measure up how much you need between the knuckles just by kind of lining them up beside each other, really. But anyway, so what I did here then is I turned this on a lathe, put this into the lathe and turned it down. I made up a ring that fitted around here and just cut it in two halves and held this piece in the chuck, so the knuckle was back inside in the chuck. And I turned this down to 13.2 odd millimeters, so about 13.25 is a nice fit. And what I also have here, if I get the camera to focus, is a little bit of a flat filed on. So that flat allows the bolt to cross over here. You'll notice there's no splines here, and I think while it is entirely possible to machine the splines in, and the way I'm going to do it, you don't need to machine the splines in. So once I have a sweet spot found inside in the car, so that's everything inside in the car all bolted up, spinning the steering wheel around, everything works fairly well. I'll just put a black mark on that just in case it moves or anything. And then what I'll do is, where the Toyota joint meets this, it'll be somewhere up around here where my finger is, I'll put a runner weld around the back of it here. So there's no way in hell that guy's ever coming off. So once you actually squeeze the bolt up in the Toyota with the flat on the bar there, I don't actually think it will ever slip. This is kind of a snug fit into the Toyota part, so you're going to have to push it in a little bit. So you're kind of going to have to keep the flat of the bolt lined up, or you'll have difficulty kind of turning it. Not that you can't, but it won't definitely do it inside in the car. So you'll have to turn all that guy up, so get it so that the bolt is straight across here. I'll just get a bolt here to make sure I understand what I mean. So if you get a bolt, the bolt will be fitting across the flat there like that. So the threads in the bolt will be down here. So that doesn't actually allow this guy to rotate inside, and the squeeze you put on the bolt squeezes in the Toyota knuckle all around it. The Toyota knuckle is split, unlike these guys. So once you squeeze that down there, it probably is realistically enough to hold it on. But for belts and braces, a shot of weld around the back here is what I'll do. And I'll show that in the clip. It's a simple thing to do. It's all mild steel, so there's no problem welding or anything like that. So I'll get into the car now and start fitting this fella, and I'll take a shot inside in the car so you can see how it fits in. I think you can just make out the knuckle there that I've done. So you see now where it fits. You can see what I mean by the Toyota joint being split. You can see the bolt running around there. So I've got the bolt tightened up there at the moment now. So what I'm going to do for belts and braces is I'm going to put some weld in this area here, just to make sure it absolutely fits in. There is ample, if I take a shot there, of the shaft there. So it's well below the bolt there, almost at the bottom of the joint. And you can see the flat there where the screw is clamped on. The bolt can pass through. If you try and put the bolt in without the flat, it's not really going to fit for you. You can probably force it with like a ratchet gun or something, but you're going to wreck the bolt. So the flat is the job. So I don't have the bolt in the steering column just yet there, but you can see the bolt just goes back into the normal place. I've got some bolts here in my steering box just to kind of bolt it all up. For doing the final length and all that kind of stuff, like, I mean, you do have a bit of room here, so the whole idea is this guy can still move up and down a little bit before we weld it. But be sure and put in all your bolts and your steering column and all that, just to make sure you get everything right. So you can see there's ample room there for everything to turn around. But I'll show you from the engine bay where I think there is a small bit of an issue, relatively easily fixed, but I'll just show you where the issue is. Here we can see the Toyota joint bolted on as normal. And I think you'll see what the issue is. This fella here is very close to here. Now there is a small bit of movement on this, the joint here. You can move it in and out a little few degrees and bolt up the brackets, and the steering will stay where it's put, steering rack. So I like to keep it in a kind of a more neutral position. I wouldn't like to be relying on the steering rack tipped in a little bit more to clear this a bit better. Now, while this does clear, I mean, you can turn it, it doesn't catch it. It is far too close for comfort. So what I will definitely do is mark this guy here and take a extra piece of metal out of there. Nothing serious, we're talking probably, I mean, 3mm is probably heaps, and the pieces of metal are nowhere near touching. I mean, it might appear in the camera here that they're touching. They ain't touching, but they're very, very close. So this is where the reason the Mark 1 steering boot doesn't really fit back on. The boot doesn't fit well over the Toyota joint anyway. They're kind of a different shape. The Toyota ones are much longer. So what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to make up a metal piece like you've seen in the Sirocco, and I'll do a profile of that around here, and take my time, bend it up in a piece of aluminium. I'll weld a bolt on here, or a nut, or a stud, one of the two, and I'll have it so I can just leave that covered on over, tighten down my screw, and hunky-dory, all as well. Nice clean job there. So that's a EP90 steering rack. I have a Toyota Starlet. It's a power steering rack fit into a Mark 1 Golf. The two hoses are over here. It's really easy to make up some pipes, some metal pipes, and bring them along here. Like as in, if you follow my fingers along the chassis leg here, out over here, it's really, really easy. You don't need massive diameter pipes here. You can use the flexi hoses, they're way easier, but they are bigger diameter. But if you use something like, say, like 10mm a metal pipe like they do in the OEM type setup, even 8mm I think is plenty. You can, if you're careful to spin your pipe, take your time, you get them over to here somewhere. You can bring a flexi pipe then off to the pump, and the other pump then return to your reservoir. I plan on going in under the chassis like here and putting my reservoir in around here someplace. I think I'm going to put the reservoir. So I'm going to get a kind of small reservoir and have the fluid returning back up under the chassis like here, and the feed then back down to the pump, back down through here, because the Volkswagen pump will sit around this area here. And that's what I plan on doing, so hopefully that works out. So that's the rack fitted. So I guess work like this really does seem to be a bit of a pain in the ass while you're doing it, but I think in long term it really does pay off. Getting rid of the rust, like I mean, you get a lot of areas kind of like just the insides of the lips where they're folded, where the metal, the paint just lifts off, like along these kind of areas along here, in around here. You might end up cutting some of that out yet for the intercooler. So this kind of edges like that, they all take a bit of a beating over the years and get a bit on the furry side. So I'm going to continue on this evening. I'm going to do another small bit. I've just two different colour primers there, just because I ran out of the grey stuff and I had the red stuff. There's kind of better coverage in the red stuff, I think. But I ran down the strut towers here as well. I gave them a good blasting too. And I'll just show you what I use now. So here's the tools I'm using. There's nothing fancy, it's all stuff anyone can buy anywhere. This is just a 4-inch angle grinder. It's a nice, particularly small one. You can see the size of my hand there. Once you have your hand on it, it's almost all covered up there. I like that. This wheel would have been a kind of a plate style wheel or a disc wheel, so it would have been about that diameter, and it's worn down. Of course, all the wires eventually start flying out. You start losing them. They stick all over your clothes. Wear plenty of coats, plenty of jumpers with these guys, because they're not a t-shirt job. They go straight through t-shirts. So this is the next wheel that's up. No particular order or anything. It's just bought 2 of them on the day. This one is kind of a cup type wheel again. I like to use these kind of much more softer bristles for this type of work, because it's not really heavy crap that I'm trying to lift. It's just kind of lift the paint and kind of get it kind of down to almost bare metal. Not that I'm trying to bare metal the car or anything, but it does, we say, any corrosion in any area at all. It's any little bit furry, definitely drive her down there. Of course, I've used a blast of these guys as well, different diameters for getting into the smaller areas, little wire wheels on the end of a drill. And I also have used these guys as well. They're a much smaller version, but same sort of thing. Put them into the battery drill and drive away. But I think what I find out very, very useful as well, and is this is a wood chisel. So just a common or garden wood chisel. I have it at years now, and I find it great for getting into little corners and nooks and stuff like that, where the wheels, because of the diameter of them, you can't get into the radiuses. And even with the small wheels like this, you're still limited. I mean, you can sit up on top of the drill and try and force it in, but there's little areas you just really don't get to. So the wood chisel, I think, is very handy just to get up that last little bit, just kind of a little hook around like that kind of stuff there. The primer I'm using currently is this thing, but that's just what I find works fairly well for me. I find this stuff for putting paint on afterwards, it doesn't seem to react. I've used it for a while now. While a lot of them say acrylic primer, I have had plenty of episodes myself where I'm painting over it, and the so-called acrylic primer that is the same as the rest of them, the paint starts just crazing, like cracking up, and in spots here and there for what seems like no reason. I mean, I'm using panel wipe and all that kind of stuff beforehand, but with this brand of stuff here, I've never had any hassle with it. Touch wood, which is right here, so we'll definitely touch some wood there. Another thing I like using as well is I like using the tubes, like for the silicone type gun applicator of the Tiger Seal. I find this stuff pretty good now. It goes off well relatively quickly. I suppose it's probably the day after really before you can overpaint it. But I like it in the tubes as opposed to the cans, because with the nozzle and all that, you can force it into little small corners that with the cans you're not inclined to, and of course it gets a lot messier too. You kind of really need to tape the area up almost, but with this stuff I find myself you don't have to. So that's just a little selection of the stuff I use. I also use lots of this stuff here. Good old mug of coffee there. Keep the fella going. So it's back to work now for a while. Well, I did just give a quick rub there to the inside of the chassis legs, bit on the inner wings there, both sides of the car there, just to kind of clean it up there. I put a bit of seam sealer in around the welding and stuff like that done. I'll give that a shot of the red primer yet, but what I'm going to concentrate now on for a while is I am back to steering. So, believe it or not, this is my cardboard cutout. I've taped a few pieces together, took a few attempts to kind of get it somewhat right, that I was happy with. So, and you can see then the various lines I've bent it up on. So I finally ended up here like this. So basically this piece of cardboard ended up looking like that. And this guy here folded over or curved over, as the case may be. So this fits in around the car nice and snug. And around the knuckle joint for the steering. And here's my piece of metal bent, and I've got a bit of tape on it at the minute. And the reason I show the tape is I've got some body adhesive here, or let's see, a bit closer here. Got some Tiger Seal in there, and I just use a piece of paper tape to pull it in together so I'm happy with it. And the Tiger Seal then will keep this shape. And no matter what way I bent, this is aluminium by the way. It's a piece of aluminium, just give it a little bit of a cleaning up there. It's just a piece of scrap I had lying around. So you can see I have deviated from the plan as slightly as I've made much more of a curve here. So when I rip the tape off now, we'll see how it fits. So I've got the tape pulled off, and you see what I mean by the Tiger Seal on the inside. Just some blobs of it in there, just to kind of keep it together the way I wanted to keep it. It's nothing spectacular. It's what I want. This is actually a piece of a skid plate of another car. So you can see this car ran into some difficulties, and the skid plate remained here afterwards. And I've got a hole drilled in it, and the hole is for the bolt. So I've ovaled out my hole here. This is from inside in the car. This is where the rubber boot would have went. So I've kind of taken some material out of here that I had marked in the front to make sure the knuckle doesn't touch anything. I've welded in as well, kind of just a piece of plate there to act as a captive nut. So when I bolt in my metal boot from the front, this nut just going to be bolt into that basically. The nut just stays there rather than trying to be fidgeting around, because I'm doing all this work on my own. I don't have any extra pair of hands to hold things for me or anything like that. So I'll just give it a shot of kind of primer there at the minute, just kind of to dose it up and stop it kind of making rusting. So that's that little piece done. I've added a small little bit of plate in under my pedal here. This is the pedal mount. I've added, just tacked in a piece of plate there, welded in a just kind of shape roughly, and I put a captive nut on it. And this is basically my adjustable throttle stop, which will be necessary because if you're pelting down the road and you've got your foot to the floor and you're constantly leaning and relying on the internals of the pedal to be the stop, my gut feeling would be that you're going to end up actually breaking it. So by putting on a physical stop here, which just matches in with the rubber on the back of the pedal, if you look at the back of the pedal you'll see, so that solves that problem. Back inside the engine bay again, and you can see the hole in my captive nut welded in, and this is my new boot. So the idea is, of course, that this fella goes on here, you stick the screw down through the top there. The camera's finding a bit of difficulty there to shine off the light, but and the idea is that this guy is nice and snug in around there. So it takes a bit of effort to kind of get this guy. I mean, it's not sitting 100% random, but it's pretty close, as you can see there. So when I put my bolt on this guy sits here. I think this works excellent. I think as like a heat shield as well for the knuckle. Is it airtight going into the car? No, it's not. But I'd be wondering how airtight it needs to be. You could always put, I guess, something on the inside of the car as well, like a kind of a brush type seal, all the bristles, and that would help some of the draft if it was bothering you to stop coming into the car. Although I think most of the draft is going to be going in this guy here is going to be a warm draft. With the turbocharger down here, it's going to be quite a bit of heat, and if you're doing some track driving, you'll be using that heat a lot, and I guess anywhere it's going to go to dissipate it is going to be good. So even into the cabin mightn't be a terrible thing, especially if it's a cold day. Anyway, I keep driving for now. I'm getting close now to finishing up the engine bay and giving it a coat of paint, and I suppose I might have a few little brackets to add for the intercooler pipe and stuff like that, but things I can add that I know where they're going prior to the engine going back in. One I mentioned was the power steering return pipe here that I wanted to run it along the legs there, along with the flexi hose. The flexible hose, I'm going to make some brackets for that, but I think I'd only need the one out around here somewhere, and the hose will actually kind of like automatically kind of like find its own way here. But I have this pipe, this stainless pipe here, 12mm pipe that I've bent up, and if I was to look down at the camera in a kind of like from the top, looking like from the crow's view, you can see here that you can't see the pipe, and that's what I was kind of, my main aim here was that this pipe was not going to impinge on the engine mount. So if I tip the camera back out at an angle, then you can see that I've got it well tucked in there. So my pipe bending has been really to get this guy in there, and the pipe will be cut around here somewhere. I'm going to use the Toyota piece on the steering rack here, and there's a small flexible hose coming out of a metal pipe that's bolted into the steering rack, so that will come up to here nicely, fit in around here somewhere, and it'll be a nice straight and a curve run in this type of direction here. So I think that's going to work out pretty well and look really tidy. So while it was at it here, I've got a captive nut in the back of this little piece of plate here that I put in. I've welded that onto the chassis leg here, just the top of it, just a quick simple run across. So this guy, I can still bend it in and out if I want to. It's only like 1.5mm plate. And so this is an actual bracket of, get the camera to focus here. This is an actual clip of a Mark IV power steering pipe setup. I've just mightn't recognise it because I actually washed it, because these generally end up totally covered in muck. But they're a stainless bracket with rubber clips, so they're in the Mark IV. The actual captive nutset of a Mark IV as well, that piece there. So I had a few of those bits and pieces lying around. So I bent the pipe in around here, in under the chassis leg, and I'm arriving then back up here. I'm tying with which power steering bottle I'm going to use it. I'm kind of aiming towards Mark IV, but there's a possibility I might use a BMW part, as the entry for the return is on the bottom. So I'm thinking of putting the power steering reservoir here, and I'll mount it on here, this area here, which a bracket I cut off the car, or drilled off the car. I wasn't sure what it was for, something to do with the diesel. And again, similar down here then, just a piece of flat plate. I put a bolt in the back of it, cut the head off the bolts. This is just like a stud now, welded it on the back, and just tacked this guy in onto the car here. So this guy is holding here, so my rubber hose will go from here up. So then I should be left with a kind of a relatively neat setup there for the return fluid. While I was at it, I was kind of looking around to see what other wee jobs I might do, and I mentioned maybe filling up these holes here. Might put some grommets in, yet not 100% sure, or make my mind up. What I have done here is I've welded in 3 studs in under here, and I'll show you in a minute what I welded those guys in there for. When I'm welding studs in here, because more often than not you're probably on your own, what I do is I mark where my holes are. The studs in these are M6, even though this plate here it's a millimetre thick, if it even is a millimetre. What I do is actually I run a tap through them. The hole is drilled 5, these are an M6. Which allows me to cut the head off the bolt and screw it in with my fingers here. There's not much thread holding it, but of course you don't need much holding it, so I kind of start in the middle of the stud then, or screw, and weld, kind of try and puddle the weld out to the car, because the stud being 6 mil thick and this being like about 0.8 millimeters, it's very easy to blow holes in the car. So what I find myself works is to start at the screw, kind of get that melting, and then just try and let the metal encourage it to go out. So inevitably you end up with a little piece to grind off afterwards, but I'm quite okay with that there. Just grind him off there. I do use the old trusty air torch here, so when I'm doing all this welding, give him a shot weld and then cool him off to stop the car burning on the inside, and helps with all that good stuff. So I'll hop into the inside of the car now and show you what I've got these guys on for. I think you can see what I've done here, what I'm using the 3 studs for. This is the Mark IV ECU holder. This will be mounted in the rain tray. It bolts out of the car, and inside the Mark I, of course, you got to have the ECU somewhere. So I just had that guy kept from the car. The car's gone to the bin now a long time. So with a small bit of bending on the bracket, just a little bit here, and a smidgen up on the top there. So very slight bit of reconstruction there, no need for welding or grinding or anything at all, just bend it. This stuff is kind of light enough. With the studs bolted in now, I have the Mark IV ECU holder in the rain tray bolted in here. I've got it bolted in so that it slips up this direction, and that the wiring will come out the bottom. And this is my hole here where the grommet will come, and most of the wiring, all the engine wiring will come in through here and plug into one plug. There's 2 plugs, of course, on the ECU, and the second plug is going to be input from like the ignition key and some output stuff like to the fuel pump and things like that. What I did as well was, if you might notice here, I've got kind of like a hexagon thing going on here, was the grommet that I have for the Mark IV loom isn't the grommet that came with it. That's got a huge, you would need a massive hole drilled in the car, and it would kind of start moving into other holes and all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't going to work out. So I got a smaller one off a Toyota loom that I had scrap. But when I put the Toyota loom, or the grommet, into the car here after I drilled the hole, now there was a hole here already, if you remember, I filled in up around this area here. What I noticed was the grommet was actually quite loose in the car. So even though the grommet fitted in diameter correctly, if rain was to run down or water was to splash up, I think myself it would actually come into the car. So what I did was I just drilled a hole in a piece of metal, and basically this is just a 1 mil piece, and just to thicken up the car. And with the bulkhead that little bit thicker, the grommet is really nice and tight now, so it feels comfortable that when you put it in, that it's got a good seal, so that if water was to come down from the rain tray, which does pass awful close to this, if the car was like parked on a bit of a slope or anything, there's a good chance water would run down the face of that and start running into the car then, which probably would lead to rot on the floor, and probably has in many a car because I think that's actually a standard hole in the car. Anyway, rabbiting on a bit. So now that piece of extra thickness is there on the metal, it fits in, the grommet fits in much tighter, and it's more of a squeeze in, and I'm just happier with it anyway, so that's what I want to do. So that's just something I think worth mentioning there. There's the Mark IV ECU tray into the car, and it's well up out of the way. I've got my heater matrix at the minute removed from the car there at the minute. So I mean, while you're this far ripping up the car, you might as well take that out and wash it out and give that just kind of give it a clean up and make sure it's okay. Have a good look at the fins and stuff in case it's rotten. But I can unbolt my little tray here quite easily and fit it back in. And like I say, tapping the bulkhead, even though I've got minimal tread, and putting the screws in and welding them in afterwards then from the outside. For a one-man job, this definitely makes life a little bit easier.